Philadelphia's Oakmont Cemetery held its breath under a warm October sky. Morning sunlight filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across marble headstones that stretched in orderly rows toward the horizon. But beneath the white funeral tent erected near Section E, Row 12, silence pressed down like a physical weight. 247 mourners stood in perfect stillness. Black suits, black dresses, black umbrellas held against a sky that threatened rain but hadn't yet delivered. Every face carved with a particular grief that comes when death takes someone too young, too vital, too necessary to the world. The golden casket rested on a hydraulic platform above an open grave, 6 feet deep, walls of earth cut clean and straight, and at the bottom a detail that would haunt witnesses for years, a layer of fresh concrete still damp, poured just hours before. Inside the casket, visible through the half-open viewing window, Samantha Fairchild lay motionless, 34 years old, CEO of Vantage Tech Industries, Pennsylvania's most aggressive technology conglomerate. Her empire spanned 7 states, employed 1,200 people, generated revenues that made shareholders wealthy and competitors nervous. But empires meant nothing now. Her skin held the waxy pallor of death, eyes closed, lips touched with pale rose lipstick that funeral directors used to create the illusion of peaceful sleep. Hands folded across her chest, fingers interlaced over a single white lily. Her dark hair had been styled carefully spread across white satin pillows in a way she would have hated, too formal, too arranged, too much like surrender. Peter Fairchild stood beside the casket, husband of 7 years CFO of the company his wife had built. He held a neatly folded white handkerchief in his left hand, brought it occasionally to his eyes, though no actual tears fell. His performance was flawless. The grief-stricken spouse, the man who'd lost his entire world. 42 years old, expensively dressed, even in mourning, with the kind of polished handsomeness that photographed well for business journals. His suit was charcoal Armani, his shoes Italian leather, his watch a Patek Philippe that cost more than most attendees earned in a year. He'd practiced this moment, rehearsed the posture, the timing of the handkerchief, the way to let his shoulders slump just enough to suggest a man barely holding himself together. Pastor Samuel Green cleared his throat, adjusted his Bible, and prepared to deliver the final prayer. He was 71, had officiated 612 funerals in his 40-year career, and had developed the particular tone that made mourners feel both comforted and appropriately solemn. "Friends, we gather here to..." Two cemetery workers stepped forward, hands reaching for the casket handles. The hydraulic lift would lower Samantha into the concrete-lined grave, the concrete that would seal her forever, preventing any possibility of the casket shifting, settling, or being disturbed. The perfect prison. Pastor Green's voice strengthened. "Ashes to ashes, dust to..." "Stop!" The word exploded across the cemetery like a thunderclap. Every head whipped around. Phones appeared instantly, the modern reflex. A dozen cameras already recording before their owners consciously decided to film. At the back of the crowd, a figure burst through the gathered mourners with desperate urgency. A man in a worn blue work uniform, the kind cemetery groundskeepers wear. His clothes were rumpled, slept in, his beard overgrown, patchy, hair tangled and too long, as if scissors had become a luxury he couldn't afford. But his eyes burned with terrible clarity. "Don't bury her," his voice cracked. "She's not dead," gasps rippled through the assembly. Security guards, 2 large men in dark suits, moved to intercept. The man ducked under the first guard's reaching arms, sidestepped the second with surprising agility, and kept coming. The wind caught the hem of his uniform jacket, making it billow like wings. He stopped at the edge of the carpeted platform where the casket rested, chest heaving, and turned to face the entire crowd. 247 pairs of eyes stared back. A name badge still clung to his chest pocket, slightly crooked. "Micah Dalton, regional manager." "My name is Micah Dalton," he said, fighting to control his breathing. "Listen to me. This woman is still alive." Peter Fairchild's face transformed. The grief mask slipped for just a heartbeat, replaced by something cold and reptilian before snapping back into place. "Get this lunatic out of here." Peter's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Security, my wife has passed. We will bury her in peace. This man is..." "She hasn't passed." Micah's voice cut through. "Someone gave her something, a drug. It slows the heartbeat so much you can't detect it without advanced equipment. It drops body temperature, makes her appear dead, but she's still alive, still conscious, trapped in a paralyzed body. The words landed like stones in still water ripples of shock spreading outward. Tetrodotoxin, Micah continued, naming the poison with frightening precision. Give her the antidote right now or you're burying her alive. The crowd erupted. Whispers became shouts. Cameras zoomed in. A reporter near the front leaned forward, trying to catch every syllable. Peter's jaw tightened. Enough! Remove him! Now! But Micah didn't retreat. He lifted his chin, looked directly at Peter with an expression that held no fear, only grim certainty. Peter, he said the name softly, almost intimately. You know what you did. And Dr. Mason Keating knows too. The name hit like a physical blow. Every eye in the cemetery swiveled left, finding the family physician standing 20 feet from the casket. Dr. Mason Keating, 54, wire-rimmed, glasses, expensive overcoat. The stethoscope tucked into his pocket seemed to mock him now. His face went the color of old paper. Micah turned back to the crowd, voice strengthening. I heard them 2 nights ago, in the parking lot behind the cemetery's administrative building. Peter and Dr. Keating planning this. Planning to poison her, fake her death rush the burial before anyone could question. He's insane, Peter snapped. Pastor, continue. Check her. Micah's desperation broke through. Just check her. Feel her wrist, her neck. She's still warm. Her heart is still beating. You just can't hear it without the right equipment. Please, I'm begging you. Silence crashed down. Then a voice from the front row. A woman in a purple coat, perhaps 60, with the bearing of someone who'd seen enough of life to trust her instincts over appearances. If there's any chance, her voice trembled, we should check. This is unnecessary, Peter said, but sweat had appeared on his forehead despite the cool morning. The doctor examined her, signed the death certificate. Let them check. Another voice, male, from the middle of the crowd. It costs nothing to verify. Just check. Someone else called. What had been whispers became a wave. Heads nodding, eyes narrowing at Peter's resistance. Even the guards exchanged uncertain glances. Dr. Mason Keating cleared his throat, trying to regain control. This is absurd. Grief makes people desperate, makes them say, she gave you a hospital. Micah's voice went quiet, dangerous. Samantha Fairchild donated $2 million to expand your clinic. She bought you that Tesla you drive. She trusted you. Something flickered in the doctor's eyes. He glanced at Peter. Peter gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't. Micah set his toolkit on the grass, knelt beside the casket with the reverence of someone approaching an altar. His hands, calloused and scarred, moved with surprising gentleness. Please, he said to the pastor, to anyone who would listen. Help me lift her. Just a little. She needs air. Then open her mouth. 1 drop is all it takes. The silence that followed felt apocalyptic. Then an elderly woman stepped forward from the front row. 70-something, impeccably dressed with steel gray hair and eyes that had witnessed too much to be easily deceived. I am Samantha's aunt, she announced, Helen Fairchild. If there is even the smallest chance my niece is alive, we will take it. The spell shattered. 2 women moved instantly to help. A young man in a black suit, looked like one of Samantha's junior executives, slipped his hand beneath her shoulder. The cemetery workers stepped back, giving space. Together carefully, they lifted Samantha just enough for Micah to slide his folded jacket beneath her neck, elevating her head slightly. Up close, she looked merely asleep, eyelashes casting long shadows across her cheeks. The white cotton plug in her nostril, standard funeral preparations, stood out starkly against her pale skin. Remove the cotton, Micah said softly. She needs to breathe. Aunt Helen nodded. With trembling but determined fingers, she pulled the cotton free. The air seemed to shift. Micah reached into his pocket and produced a small brown vial. Glass. Old. The kind of medical container that had traveled through war zones and emergency rooms. He held it up for everyone to see. Tetrodotoxin antidote, he said. I'm a former Army medic, served in Afghanistan. We carried these for chemical weapons exposure. This will counteract the paralytic agent in her system. Peter lunged forward. Don't you dare! But 2 mourners, both men, both large, stepped between Peter and the casket. Let him try, one said. If it doesn't work, we continue the burial, Aunt Helen added, her voice sharp as a blade. But if it worked, then God help whoever did this. Dr. Mason Keating's face had gone from pale to ghostly. You can't just administer unknown substances. If you're certain she's dead, Aunt Helen cut him off, then this can't hurt her. Can it, doctor? Trapped by his own lie, the physician said nothing, every eye fixed on the tiny vial in Micah's hand. The sun broke through clouds, pouring golden light across the scene, as if some invisible hand had positioned a spotlight on this moment. On the casket, on the grave, on the man in the worn uniform who suddenly looked like the last hope any of them had. Micah twisted the cap off the vial, dipped the glass dropper into clear liquid. Please help me open her mouth, he said to Aunt Helen. She leaned down, used gentle fingers to part Samantha's lips. The young executive lifted her shoulders a bit more, tilting her head to the optimal angle. Micah bent close. The entire crowd leaned with him, drawn by invisible strings. Peter trembled visibly. If you do this, his voice strangled itself into silence. Micah positioned the dropper directly above Samantha's mouth. One drop, he whispered. Come back. He squeezed gently. A single clear droplet fell, landing on Samantha's tongue. No one breathed, not a leaf stirred. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned the sky. Micah counted silently, each number a small eternity. 1, 2, 3, nothing. 4, 5. A cold gust swept through the tent, making the white drapes snap and billow. 6. Micah's hand began to shake. He raised the dropper again, preparing for a second dose. Don't you dare. Peter screamed, lunging forward with such violence that spit flew from his lips. Aunt Helen threw out her arm like a barrier. Stay where you are. Micah squeezed gently. The second drop fell, and in that fragile instant between the droplet leaving the glass and touching Samantha's tongue before gravity completed its work, a sound emerged from her chest. So faint it could have been wind, or memory, or desperate imagination. Was that? Someone whispered, voice hoarse with impossible hope. The drop touched down. Samantha's throat convulsed. Her lips parted further. Then a cough, weak, wet, unmistakable. The cemetery exploded, screaming, cheering, sobbing. Prayers shouted to heaven. Phones tilting in every direction, everyone trying to capture proof of what their eyes were witnessing, but their minds couldn't process. Samantha's hand twitched. Then her fingers flexed. Her chest began rising and falling, shallow at first, then stronger. Another cough burst out, this one forceful enough to spray droplets of the antidote. She's alive. Micah breathed, tears streaming down his weathered face. I told you, she's alive. Aunt Helen clasped Samantha's wrist, feeling the pulse that had been there all along, just too slow to detect. She's warm. Oh, Lord, have mercy, she's warm. A woman in the crowd collapsed to her knees, overcome. God is great. God is truly great. But Peter Fairchild felt nothing except the empire he'd planned slipping through his fingers like water through a cracked vessel. His hands shot into his coat pocket, closed around cold glass. A second syringe, this one filled with darker liquid. The finishing dose. The one that would ensure Samantha never woke from this paralysis. He pulled it out. The sun caught the glass, making it flash like a signal flare. Micah saw it, froze. Is that... Stay back, Peter roared, eyes bulging, all pretense abandoned. She belongs in the ground. Do you hear me? In the ground. Two men in dark suits, not security attendees, lunged at Peter. He shoved one aside with desperate strength, but the second grabbed his arm just as the syringe came up. They crashed to the ground. The syringe flew from Peter's hand, hit the concrete edge of the grave, and shattered. Murky liquid spread across the white carpet like a bloodstain. The crowd recoiled. Mothers pulled children close. The pastor dropped his Bible. Micah stood firm in the chaos, turning back to Samantha. His voice went from thunder to gentle wind. Easy, you're safe now. Samantha's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, pupils struggling to adjust to light after hours of paralyzed darkness. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but her vocal cords weren't responding yet. She turned her head just slightly, just enough to look at Peter. Recognition flooded her expression. Not confusion, not shock, understanding. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper, cracked and broken. Peter, why? In that moment, all strength drained from Peter Fairchild. The syringe had been his last desperate gambit. Without it, there was no path forward except confession or destruction. The choice made itself. Security guards rushed in now, pinning Peter down despite his thrashing. No, no, she was supposed to die. Everything was supposed to be mine. The mask of grief he'd worn throughout the funeral shattered completely, revealing the naked ambition and rage beneath. Every eye turned to Dr. Mason Keating. He'd backed away several steps, faced the color of ash sweat soaking through his expensive shirt despite the cool air. I, I diagnosed based on what I observed, he stammered. I thought she had passed. The symptoms were lies. Micah's voice cut like a blade. You helped him. You signed in that death certificate knowing she was alive. That wasn't medical error. That was murder. Samantha coughed again, harder this time. Aunt Helen supported her, cradling her niece's head. Samantha's hair fell forward, skin slick with sweat, but her eyes, red fierce, burning with betrayal, locked onto Peter. What did I ever do to you? Her voice broke on every word. Did I deserve this? Peter lay motionless in the guard's grip, all fight gone. Samantha's next words came out fractured, each one a knife. I gave you power, position. I trusted you with my company. I loved you. And this is how you repay me. The crowd erupted again, some weeping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. She turned to Dr. Mason Keating and her voice went cold. I built your hospital. I funded your research. I lifted you up when you had nothing, and you helped bury me alive. The doctor opened his mouth. No words emerged. His silence was confession enough. Samantha swayed, strength fading fast. Micah lunged forward, catching her with hands roughened by hard labor but impossibly gentle. He eased her back against the makeshift pillow. Easy, you're safe now. Their eyes met. In Samantha's gaze, wet, fragile, yet burning with life, Micah saw gratitude so profound it could shatter a man's soul. She looked past the overgrown beard, the worn uniform, the appearance of poverty and failure. She saw the human being who'd pulled her back from death's edge when the entire world had been ready to bury her. Who are you? She whispered. Micah Dalton. Why did you do this? His voice went rough, weighted with old grief. Because I knew the truth. I heard them planning it, and I couldn't let it happen. Not again. The mourners leaned in, absorbing every syllable. Not again. Samantha's fingers wrapped around his wrist, surprisingly strong despite her weakness. I lost people I loved. Micah said, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. I was powerless then. But not this time. Not this time. Peter thrashed against the guards one final time, screaming with the fury of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. She was supposed to be mine. Everything was supposed to be mine. But his cries dissolved into the sound of approaching sirens. Police cars swept into the cemetery, red and blue lights flickering across marble headstones. Detective units. An ambulance. The machinery of justice responding to what witnesses were already calling a miracle. Micah remained kneeling beside Samantha, one hand supporting her head. His eyes held not pride, but the deep sorrow of someone who'd lost everything and somehow impossibly found purpose in saving a stranger. Samantha saw that sorrow, recognized it. She placed her hand over his and squeezed with what little strength she'd regained. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't leave. As paramedics rushed in with equipment and urgent voices as Peter and Dr. Mason Keating were handcuffed and led away, still protesting as cameras captured every moment for news cycles that would run for weeks, Samantha Fairchild, the woman they'd all believed dead, continued breathing. And Micah Dalton, the forgotten cemetery worker, had become the instrument of her resurrection. The funeral that was meant to end a life had instead revealed the depths of human evil and the heights of unexpected heroism. Justice was coming. But first there were questions that needed answers, stories that demanded telling. And two people, one pulled from the grave, one pulled from despair, who would need to navigate the aftermath of a crime that had almost been perfect. The Oakmont Cemetery Administrative Building stood dark and silent at 1:30 in the morning. Micah Dalton swept the back parking lot with mechanical efficiency, his push broom making rhythmic scratching sounds against pavement. 47 years old, beard patchy and unkempt, clothes that smelled of sweat, and the particular loneliness of someone who'd stopped caring about appearances. 7 years ago, he had been someone else entirely. 7 years ago, Micah had been a software engineer at Vertex Solutions on pulling down $90,000 a year, living in a modest house in the suburbs with Emma, his wife of 12 years, and Lily, their daughter. Blue-eyed, gap-toothed, 6 years old. The kind of child who drew pictures of butterflies and taped them to the refrigerator with magnetic pride. He could still remember the exact layout of those drawings. Lily in the center always. Emma and Micah on either side holding hands. Their small house with the crooked chimney. A son with a smiling face in the corner. "Our family," Lily would announce in that tiny, serious voice. "Forever and ever, Emma." Forever had lasted exactly 3 more years. The company went bankrupt first. Some combination of bad investments, worse management, and an economy that had no mercy for mid-sized tech firms. 200 employees laid off in a single day, including Micah. At 40 years old, he discovered that the tech industry had no interest in middle-aged engineers with outdated skill sets. He sent out resumes, hundreds of them, got 3 interviews, 0 offers, the savings dwindled, then disappeared. Bills piled up like accusations. Mortgage, car payment, student loans from the degree that was supposed to guarantee security, Emma's medical insurance, Lily's school supplies. Emma took extra shifts at the cafe where she'd work part-time, came home exhausted, resentful, terrified. The fight started small, snapped comments about money, whose fault it was, who wasn't trying hard enough. Then they escalated. Screaming matches, while Lily sat on the stairs hugging her teddy bear, tears streaming down her face as her parents tore each other apart with words that couldn't be taken back. Micah remembered the specific moment he realized he'd lost. Not the job, not the house, his family. He came home after yet another failed interview, the 87th, he'd been counting, to find the house empty. No Emma, no Lily, no furniture except what was too heavy to move quickly. Just a note on the kitchen counter. His hand still shook when he remembered reading it. 10 times. 20. Each word burning itself into memory. "Micah, I can't do this anymore. I'm exhausted. I'm done. And there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago. Lily isn't your daughter. I'm sorry. Don't look for us." Emma, the world had ended in that moment. Not with drama, not with noise, with absolute crushing silence. The child he'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, read stories to every single night. Who called him daddy in that voice that made his heart physically ache with love? Not his, had never been his. Micah didn't remember collapsing. But he remembered being on the floor, face pressed against cold linoleum, screaming until his throat bled. The bank took the house 3 months later. He'd stopped paying the mortgage the day Emma left. What was the point? He slept in his car until they repoed that too. Then parks, under bridges, in alleys where the smell of garbage was almost enough to drown out the smell of his own failure. He stood on the Delaware River Bridge more times than he could count, looked down at black water, calculated how long it would take, whether it would hurt, whether anyone would even notice. But he never jumped. Cowardice, maybe, or some stubborn fragment of survival instinct that refused to surrender even after everything else had been taken. 6 months ago, the cemetery needed a night watchman. No resume required. Just show up, keep the grounds secure, pick up trash. They gave him a small room in the storage building, barely larger than a closet. No windows, a cot, a space heater that clanged all night. It was enough. It was more than he deserved. So Micah swept parking lots at 1:30 in the morning and tried not to think about butterfly drawings or the sound of a little girl laughing or the weight of betrayal so complete it had hollowed him out and left only the shell of who he used to be. The sound of a car engine pulled him from the spiral of memory. Headlights swept across the parking lot. Micah stepped into the shadow of a dumpster, instinct habit, the invisible reflex of someone who'd learned to avoid attention. A black Mercedes S-Class. Expensive. Out of place at this hour. 2 men emerged. The first Micah didn't recognize. 40-something white wearing what looked like an expensive suit even at this hour. Polished shoes. The bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The second man Micah knew by sight, if not by name. Dr. Mason Keating. He'd seen the doctor at a few funerals, family physician to wealthy clients, the kind who made house calls and never bothered with insurance paperwork. They stood 20 feet from Micah's position. close enough to hear if he stayed quiet. The first man lit a cigarette, took a long drag. The drug worked perfectly. His voice carried clear authority. I tested the dose on a laboratory rat. Clinical death for 6 hours. Complete revival afterward. No brain damage. No lasting effects. Dr. Keating's voice trembled. Richard, this is insane. If anyone discovers, Richard. Micah filed the name away. No one will discover anything, Richard cut him off. Tomorrow night you administer the injection during her annual checkup. She'll collapse within 20 minutes. You declared death by cardiac arrest perfectly plausible given her stress levels and her father's history. We hold the funeral Saturday morning. Fast burial. Before anyone thinks to question. Micah's hands clenched around the broom handle. What if someone orders an autopsy? Richard exhaled smoke with the casual confidence of someone who'd already calculated every angle. You're her family physician, Leonard. You signed the death certificate. No one questions Dr. Mason Keating's medical opinion. By the time anyone might suspect foul play, she'll be 6 feet under with concrete poured over the grave. The words landed like physical blows. Why are you doing this? Dr. Keating's voice had gone hollow. Samantha never, because she humiliated me. Richard's voice dropped to something cold and dead. Broke off our engagement in front of the entire board. Called me replaceable during a shareholders meeting. Said I'd never be more than middle management material. He flicked ash onto the pavement. Well, she's the replaceable one, Leonard. Once she's dead, her shares transfer to the family trust. I'm the executor. I'll control Vantage Tech Industries within 6 weeks. $850 million in assets. 1,200 employees. Everything mine. What if she wakes up? The question came out barely above a whisper. In the coffin? Richard's laugh was short, ugly, devoid of any humanity. She won't. Tetrodotoxin lasts 48 to 72 hours, even if she somehow regains consciousness. He shrugged. Sealed casket, limited oxygen. She'll suffocate before anyone hears her screaming. Micah stood frozen in the shadows, every muscle locked. His vision had narrowed to a single point. His pulse hammered so loud it seemed impossible they couldn't hear it. Dr. Keating removed his glasses, cleaned them with shaking hands. I can't be part of murdering someone. Richard stepped closer and his voice went from cold to dangerous. Your daughter Jessica is 16. Smart kid. Applying to Yale early admission. Full academic scholarship potential. He paused. Be a real shame if someone found cocaine in her locker. Tragic how one mistake can derail an entire future. The color drained from the doctor's face. You wouldn't. Try me, help me, or Jessica's life is over before it starts. Your choice, Leonard. The doctor's shoulders sagged. Complete defeat. When? Tomorrow night, Friday. She has her annual checkup scheduled for 7 p.m. Perfect timing. You inject her during the exam. She drives home, starts feeling strange, pulls over. Someone finds her. You're called to the scene. You declare her dead. We hold the funeral Saturday. Simple. Clean. Perfect. They climbed back into the Mercedes, the engine purred to life. Headlights swept across the parking lot one final time before the car disappeared into the night. Micah remained in the shadows for several minutes after they'd gone, unable to move, unable to process what he'd just heard. A woman was going to be murdered tomorrow night. Poisoned. Buried alive. Her killer would inherit her empire. And Micah Dalton Cemetery groundskeeper, former software engineer, failed husband, abandoned father, was the only person who knew. His hands found his phone, shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He tried to record the conversation, but the distance, the wind, his poor quality phone, most of it was inaudible. A few fragments came through. Cardiac arrest. Saturday burial. 6 feet under. Not enough, not nearly enough for police. He called anyway. Non-emergency line. The operator sounded bored. Philadelphia police. I need to report a planned murder. That got her attention. Sir, what's your location? Oakmont Memorial Cemetery. I just overheard 2 men planning to poison someone. Samantha Fairchild, the CEO. They're going to make it look like natural death. Pause. Keyboard clicking. Sir, I'm showing that Ms. Fairchild is scheduled for a funeral this Saturday. She passed away yesterday evening. Micah's blood froze. No, she hasn't died yet. They're planning to kill her tomorrow night. Friday. Please, you have to. Do you have any evidence of this alleged plot? I heard them in the parking lot. One man is named Richard. The other is Dr. Mason Keating. Please, you have to investigate. Sir, do you have a recording, physical evidence, anything beyond an overheard conversation? No, but I understand you're concerned, but we can't open an investigation based solely on a woman is going to die. Micah's voice cracked. Sir, if you obtain concrete evidence, please call back. Until then, the line went dead. Micah stood in the empty parking lot, phone in his trembling hand, and felt the weight of impossible knowledge crushing down. He called 911, got routed to the same operator, received the same dismissal. The rest of his shift passed in a fog. He went through the motions, picked up trash, checked locks, tested storm drains, all while his mind raced through scenarios, each one more desperate than the last. He could try to warn Samantha directly. But how? She was a billionaire CEO. He was a cemetery groundskeeper with no credentials, no evidence, no way to reach her that wouldn't result in security escorting him out. He could show up at Dr. Keating's office tomorrow night, but that would just get him arrested for trespassing. And Richard would simply reschedule, find another doctor, another method. He could attend the funeral and make a scene, but they'd remove him. Bury her anyway, unless he had the antidote. Micah's mind locked onto the thought with desperate clarity. Tetrodotoxin, paralytic agent derived from pufferfish, used in chemical warfare. He'd carried the antidote as an army medic, though he'd never needed to use it. When he mustered out 8 years ago, he'd kept the field medical kit. Expensive equipment. You never knew when you might need it. That kit was in storage, untouched since Emma left, since everything fell apart. If Samantha was injected tomorrow night, if they declared her dead, if they rushed the funeral, and if Micah could get the antidote to her in time, it was insane, desperate, a plan with 1,000 points of failure. But it was the only chance she had. At 7 a.m., Micah clocked out, took the bus home, not home, the small room in the cemetery storage building where he slept, pulled out the locked metal case. Olive green, military issue. The combination still worked. Inside, packed in foam, his old medic supplies, tourniquets, bandages, morphine auto-injectors, and a small glass vial of clear liquid. Tetrodotoxin antidote, still sealed, still good assuming it hadn't degraded. Micah held the vial up to morning light, and for the first time in 7 years felt something other than despair. Purpose. He couldn't save Emma, couldn't save Lily, couldn't save his marriage, his career, his life. But maybe impossibly desperately, he could save Samantha Fairchild. The Philadelphia Police Department's interview room smelled like stale coffee and decades of desperate confessions. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh white light on everything they touched. Micah Dalton sat in a metal chair, still wearing his dirt-stained cemetery uniform, watching Detective William Carter review handwritten notes. Carter was 52, black with the build of someone who'd played linebacker in college and never quite lost the muscle mass. His eyes were sharp, assessing the kind that had seen every variety of human behavior and remained professionally skeptical of all of it. Let me make sure I have this straight. Carter's pen tapped against his notepad. Wednesday night, around 1:30 a.m., you overheard 2 men in the cemetery parking lot planning to murder Samantha Fairchild. Yes. You tried to report it to police. They dismissed you as unreliable. Yes. So you decided to attend the funeral with a military-grade antidote and stop the burial yourself. Micah met Carter's gaze without flinching. What else was I supposed to do? Let her be buried alive. Carter studied him for a long moment, then set down his pen. Mr. Dalton, you saved a woman's life today. The district attorney is very interested in your testimony, but I need to understand exactly what you heard, word for word, if possible. For the next 90 minutes, Micah recounted everything. The Mercedes arriving, Richard and Dr. Keating's conversation, the tetrodotoxin, the plan to rush the burial, the threats against the doctor's daughter. Carter took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification. Timestamps, exact phrases, physical descriptions. You said you tried to record the conversation. Micah pulled out his battered phone, played the audio file. Static, Wind noise, a few fragmentary phrases that might have been voices or might have been nothing. Carter winced. That's not going to hold up in court. I know. Micah's voice went flat. That's why I went to the funeral. Risky move. They could have called you crazy, had you arrested. They did call me crazy, but I was right. Carter leaned back, chair creaking. Dr. Keating is already talking. Signed a cooperation agreement an hour ago. He's giving us everything, emails, text messages, details of how Richard obtained the tetrodotoxin in exchange for reduced charges. And Richard, still denying everything, claims this is all a misunderstanding, that Samantha really did die of natural causes and you're some delusional vagrant who got lucky. Micah's jaw tightened. I'm not delusional. I know. We have the syringe Richard tried to use at the cemetery. Forensics confirmed it contained a lethal dose of tetrodotoxin, enough to kill her twice over. Carter paused. You stopped a murder, Mr. Dalton. Multiple murders, technically. Attempted murder of Samantha. And if he'd succeeded, probably Dr. Keating's daughter next to eliminate loose ends. The words settled heavy in the air. Where's Samantha now? Micah asked quietly. Temple University Hospital, ICU. She's stable, but... Carter hesitated. Physically, she'll recover. Mentally, that's another story. She was conscious the entire time. Felt everything, being put in the coffin, the lid closing, knowing she was about to be buried alive. Micah closed his eyes, imagining that particular hell, being trapped in your own body, screaming without sound, watching the world prepare to bury you while being completely powerless to stop it. Can I see her? Carter considered. Not yet. She's with family right now, her aunt, few close friends, but I'll pass along that you asked. And the trial fast-tracked. DA wants to move while the evidence is fresh and public interest is high. Jury selection starts Monday. You'll need to testify. Carter's expression went serious. Defense is going to come after you hard. Your background, your living situation, your mental state. They'll try to paint you as an unreliable witness, a homeless conspiracy theorist who got lucky. I'm not homeless. I know, but you live in a storage room at a cemetery. You sleep on a cot. You haven't had a permanent address in 3 years. To a jury that looks like homeless. Carter leaned forward. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it so you're prepared. Robert Finch is Richard's attorney. He's expensive and he's vicious. He'll tear you apart on cross-examination if you give him any opening. Micah thought of Emma, of Lily, of the complete destruction of everything he'd once been. Let him try. So at Temple University Hospital's ICU floor existed in a state of controlled crisis. Machines beeped. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency. The air smelled of antiseptic and the particular sterility of a place where death was held at bay through technology and expertise. Room 512 held Samantha Fairchild. She'd been conscious for 6 hours since the cemetery. Physically stable, heart rate normal, blood pressure returning to baseline. The tetrodotoxin had been flushed from her system through aggressive IV therapy, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Aunt Helen Montgomery sat in the chair beside her bed, holding her niece's hand with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd already lost too much family. 73 years old, impeccably dressed, even in crisis, with eyes that had witnessed the Great Depression and weren't easily rattled. But she was rattled now. How are you feeling? Helen's voice was gentle. Samantha stared at the ceiling. I was awake the entire time. I felt him inject me. Felt my body going numb, tried to scream and couldn't. Tried to move and couldn't. Her voice cracked. They put me in the coffin. I felt them lift me. Heard people crying. Heard Peter pretending to be devastated. She turned to look at Helen, eyes red and raw. I heard him order them to lower the casket, to bury me, and I couldn't do anything except wait to suffocate. Helen's grip tightened. You're safe now. Am I? Samantha's laugh was bitter. The man I married tried to murder me. My doctor, the man I trusted with my health, helped him. How am I supposed to feel safe ever again? By remembering that a stranger risked everything to save you. A man who had no reason to help, who would have been easier to stay silent, who chose to act anyway. Samantha was quiet for a moment. The cemetery worker. Micah. Micah Dalton. He's been asking to see you. What do we know about him? Helen pulled out her phone, showed Samantha what she'd learned. Former software engineer, lost his job 7 years ago. Wife left him, took their daughter. He became lost. Ended up working at the cemetery, living in a storage room. Samantha absorbed this. A man who'd lost everything, who had every reason to be bitter, cynical, self-absorbed. Instead, he'd saved her life. I want to see him. The doctor said you need rest. I want to see him, Samantha repeated, voice firmer. Please. Helen nodded, made a phone call, arranged it. Micah arrived at the hospital that evening having showered and borrowed clean clothes from the cemetery's lost and found. Khaki pants, white button-down shirt, still obviously worn and old, but clean. He felt profoundly out of place. This was a world of wealth and influence. He was a man who slept on a cot and swept parking lots. But Aunt Helen met him in the hallway, extended her hand with genuine warmth. Mr. Dalton, thank you for coming. How is she? Physically recovering. Emotionally? Helen paused. She experienced something no one should survive, but she wants to thank you herself. She led him to the room 512, knocked softly, then pushed the door open. Samantha sat propped up in bed, connected to various monitors, but looking far more alive than she had at the cemetery. Her dark hair was tangled, no makeup, hospital gown instead of designer clothes, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, assessing. Micah stopped just inside the door, suddenly uncertain. Mrs. Fairchild, I'm Micah Dalton. Her voice was hoarse but steady. The man who saved my life. Please sit. He took the chair beside her bed, acutely aware of the class divide between them. She was worth hundreds of millions. He owned nothing except the clothes on his back and a vial of military surplus antidote. I wanted to thank you. Samantha's eyes glistened. The police told me what you did, how you heard Richard and Dr. Keating planning it, how you tried to warn them, how you came to the funeral anyway when no one would listen. I couldn't let them bury you alive. Most people would have. Most people would have convinced themselves they misheard, or it wasn't their problem, or there was nothing they could do. She paused. Why didn't you? Micah looked down at his calloused hands. 7 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter, not to death, to betrayal. I was powerless to stop it, powerless to save what mattered. He met her eyes. I couldn't be powerless again. Not when I had the chance to actually save someone. Samantha studied him with an intensity that made Micah want to look away, like she could see through the worn clothes and unkempt beard to something deeper. Tell me about your wife, your daughter. So he did. The whole story. Emma, Lily, the bankruptcy, the note on the kitchen counter, the revelation that shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. Samantha listened without interrupting, and when he finished, there were tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. Pain doesn't have an expiration date. She reached out, took his hand. You lost everything, and still found the strength to save someone you'd never met. That's not powerless, Micah. That's the opposite of powerless. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd been broken in different ways finding unexpected connection. What happens now? Micah finally asked. Now we make sure Richard and Dr. Keating pay for what they did. Samantha's voice hardened. The trial starts Monday. I'll testify. You'll testify. And we'll make certain they never hurt anyone again. The detective said Richard's lawyer is good, that he'll try to destroy my credibility. Let him try. Samantha squeezed his hand. You have the truth. That's stronger than any expensive attorney. Micah wanted to believe her. But he'd learned the hard way that truth and justice weren't always the same thing. Philadelphia County Courthouse overflowed with spectators on Monday morning. Every seat filled. People lined the hallways hoping for overflow access. News vans covered 3-block satellite dishes pointed at the sky like flowers seeking sun. Inside courtroom 6, the air thrummed with anticipation. Samantha entered, supported by Aunt Helen, moving slowly but steadily. She wore a simple black dress, minimal jewelry, no attempt at glamour. Her presence alone commanded the room into near silence. She took her seat in the front row. Her eyes found Micah in the gallery. He had borrowed a suit from a thrift store, slightly too big, but clean and pressed, and she gave him a small nod. We're in this together. At the defense table, Richard sat in an expensive navy suit expression, carefully neutral. No grief, no remorse, just cold calculation. His attorney, Robert Finch, was everything Detective Carter had warned about. 50s, silver hair, the predatory competence that came from 30 years destroying prosecution witnesses. Oscar Mason Keating occupied a separate table, already having pled guilty in exchange for testimony. He looked diminished, shoulders hunched, the weight of his betrayal visible in every line of his face. Judge Helena Brooks took the bench, stern silver-haired, glasses sharp as her reputation. She'd seen every variety of criminal behavior and remained unimpressed by new offerings. Her gavel cracked. Court is in session. The state of Pennsylvania versus Richard Fairchild and Dr. Mason Keating. Charges: attempted murder and the first-degree conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement. How does the defendant plead? Finch stood smoothly. Not guilty, Your Honor. Prosecutor Andrew Callister rose, 45 black, with a voice that could cut like a scalpel. Your Honor, this case is not about greed alone. This is calculated evil. A conspiracy to murder a woman in the most horrific way imaginable, burying her alive. All to steal her company, her life's work, everything she'd built. He turned, pointed directly at Richard. That man poisoned his wife with a paralytic agent that mimicked death. He bribed her doctor to falsify the death certificate. He rushed the funeral to prevent any possibility of discovery. And if not for the courage of one man, Callister gestured toward Micah, Samantha Fairchild would be dead. The gallery murmured. Cameras captured every moment. Finch's opening was smooth practiced. Your Honor, my client loves Samantha Fairchild. Her death devastated him. What you've heard is a tragic misunderstanding, compounded by a desperate doctor who's trying to save himself by falsely implicating others. The prosecution's star witness is a man who lives in a storage room, who has no credible evidence, who may well have imagined this entire conspiracy. Micah's jaw clenched. Carter had warned him this was coming. The first witness took the stand. Detective William Carter walked the jury through the investigation. The 911 call, Dr. Keating's hasty death certificate, the rushed funeral arrangements, the discovery of Micah's partial recording, poor quality, but containing damning fragments. Finch's cross-examination attacked the recording's reliability. Couldn't these sounds be anything wind traffic? How can you definitively prove these are voices? The context, Carter replied evenly, combined with Dr. Keating's confession, combined with the physical evidence of the syringe, combined with Mr. Dalton's testimony. Each piece alone might be questionable. Together they form a clear picture. The prosecution called the toxicology expert next, Dr. Alan Mitchell from Penn Medicine. He explained tetrodotoxin with clinical precision, derived from pufferfish, blocks sodium channels in nerve cells, causes complete paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious. Heart rate drops to near zero, body temperature plummets. To a standard examination, the victim appears dead. Could Ms. Fairchild have survived burial? Callister asked. Dr. Mitchell's expression darkened. No, sealed casket with concrete poured over it, limited oxygen. She would have suffocated within 30 to 40 minutes, fully conscious, fully aware, unable to move or cry out. Several jurors looked physically ill. Dr. Keating testified next, walking to the stand like a man approaching his own execution. Callister's questions were gentle but thorough. How did Richard approach him? What threats were made? What exactly was the plan? Dr. Keating's confession spilled out in broken fragments. He showed me photos of my daughter, Jessica, at school. He said it would be easy to plant drugs, destroy her future. She's applying to Yale. I was terrified. Why didn't you go to the police? Because I'm a coward. Dr. Keating's voice broke. I told myself I was protecting Jessica, but really I was protecting myself. I betrayed my oath. I betrayed Samantha. I deserve everything coming to me. Samantha watched from the front row, face carefully composed. But Micah saw her hands clenching, knuckles white. Finch's cross-examination was brutal. Dr. Keating, you've agreed to testify against my client in exchange for a reduced sentence. Correct that? Yes. So you have every motivation to lie, to shift blame onto Richard to save yourself. I'm telling the truth. Are you a desperate man who poisoned his patient and now needs a scapegoat? Richard planned everything. The emails prove. Emails that could easily be fabricated. You had access to his company account, didn't you? Dr. Keating faltered. Yes, but I didn't. No further questions. The jury looked skeptical. Damage done. Wednesday morning, The courtroom packed tighter than before word having spread that the cemetery worker would testify. Micah was sworn in at 9:15. His hand on the Bible felt strangely weighted as if the oath carried physical substance. He settled into the witness chair, aware of every eye on him. The jury, the media, Samantha, Richard. Callister approached with professional warmth. "Mr. Dalton, please tell the jury what you do for a living." "I work at Oakwood Memorial Cemetery. Night shift, maintenance, security." "You weren't always in that profession, were you?" "No, I was a software engineer for 15 years, then—" He paused. "My life fell apart. Lost my job, my family. Ended up at the cemetery." Several jurors leaned forward, interested despite themselves. "Tell us about Wednesday, October 23rd. What were you doing at 1:30 a.m.? Micah recounted his shift. Routine maintenance. The Mercedes arriving. Two men emerging. I recognized Dr. Keating from funerals he'd attended. The other man I later learned was Richard Fairchild. What did you hear?" Micah repeated the conversation as precisely as memory allowed. Richard describing the tetrodotoxin test. Dr. Keating's fear. The plan to rush the burial. The jury hung on every word. Callister played the partial recording. Poor quality, fragmentary, but containing enough clear phrases to corroborate. Worked perfectly. If anyone discovers, 6 feet under. What did you do after hearing this? I called police. Non-emergency line. Told them I'd overheard a murder plot. They said I needed evidence. Did you try again? Called 911, same response. They wouldn't investigate based on an overheard conversation. So what did you do? Micah met the jury's collective gaze. I went to my storage locker, retrieved my old Army medic kit, found the tetrodotoxin antidote I'd carried in Afghanistan, and I decided that if they buried Samantha Fairchild, I would be there to save her. That was an enormous risk. I know, but I couldn't let her die. I'd failed to save people I loved before. I couldn't fail again. Silence filled the courtroom. No further questions. Finch rose for cross-examination, shark smile in place. Mr. Dalton, you described yourself as someone whose life fell apart. Let's examine that. You lost your job 7 years ago, correct? Yes. Your wife left you? Yes. Took your daughter with her? Micah's voice went flat. Yes. In fact, you discovered your daughter wasn't biologically yours. Is that correct? Pain flashed across Micah's face. That's correct. That must have been devastating. It was. Did you seek professional help, therapy, counseling? No. Why not at them? I couldn't afford it. So you've been dealing with severe emotional trauma, loss of career, family identity, without any professional support for 7 years. Objection, Callister said. Relevance? Your Honor, I'm establishing the witness's mental state, Finch replied smoothly. Judge Brooks considered. I'll allow it. But get to your point, Mr. Finch. Finch turned back to Micah. You currently live in a storage room at the cemetery. Is that correct? Yes. No permanent address, no bank account, no assets of any kind. I have a job. I have a place to sleep. I'm not homeless. But to most people, living in a storage room would be considered homeless, wouldn't it? Objection, Callister stood. Argumentative. Sustained. Finch shifted tactics. On the night you claimed to have overheard this conversation, how long had you been awake? Micah saw the trap forming. I woke at 4 p.m. that day, started my shift at midnight. So 8 hours, and you worked a full 12-hour shift after that? Yes. 20 hours awake, doing physical labor, in the middle of the night. Isn't it possible you were exhausted, that you misheard this conversation? I know what I heard. Do you? Because your recording is barely audible. We have fragments, phrases that could mean anything. Finch's voice sharpened. You're a man who's lost everything, who lives in isolation, who works graveyard shifts. Is it possible your mind, desperate for purpose, created a conspiracy where none existed? Micah's hands clenched. I didn't create anything. Richard Fairchild tried to murder his wife. I stopped him. Or you got lucky. Dr. Keating administered something, we don't dispute that. But my client's involvement in it is based entirely on your questionable testimony from a conversation you may have misheard or misinterpreted. I didn't misinterpret murder. You can't know that for certain. You weren't present for the injection. You didn't witness Richard obtaining the toxin. You heard voices in the dark and made assumptions. Those assumptions saved Samantha Fairchild's life. Or coincidence saved her life. Correlation is not causation, Mr. Dalton. Finch turned to the jury. This man wants to be a hero, wants his life to have meaning again. I sympathize with that, but we cannot convict on sympathy and assumption. Objection. Callister was on his feet. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Mr. Finch, question the witness or move on. Finch studied Micah for a long moment. No further questions. Micah stepped down, legs unsteady. He'd held up, but seeds of doubt had been planted. As he returned to his seat, Samantha caught his eye. She mouthed two words, "Thank you." Thursday. The courtroom was even more packed, people sensing the emotional climax approaching. Samantha took the stand wearing the same simple black dress. No jewelry except her mother's pearl necklace. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the Bible. Callister's questions were gentle, building slowly. Miss Fairchild, how long were you married to Richard? 7 years. Did you love him? I thought I did, or maybe I loved the idea of not being alone. Her voice was steady. I built my company from nothing, worked 16-hour days. Most men found that threatening. Richard seemed different, supportive, proud of my success. When did things change? Gradually. After we married, he wanted more control, more say in company decisions. I gave him a position as CFO, thought it would help him feel valued. She paused. Instead, it made him resent me more. I was still the CEO, still the ultimate authority, and he hated it. Did you consider divorce? Yes. 6 months ago, I broke off our engagement. We'd never officially married, just a commitment ceremony during a board meeting. I told him we were done. Her eyes found Richard. He said I'd regret it, that I'd die alone and forgotten. Richard's face remained impassive. Tell us about October 25th, the day of your injection. Samantha's breath hitched. Dr. Keating called, said I was overdue for my annual checkup. I went to his office at 7 p.m., routine examination. He gave me what he said was a B12 shot for fatigue. What happened next? I drove home. About 10 minutes later, I started feeling strange, dizzy. My hands went numb. I pulled over. Her voice dropped. Then I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. But I was awake, fully conscious, trapped in my own body. Several jurors had tears in their eyes. Do you remember being put in the coffin? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. I felt them lift me, heard people crying, heard Richard giving his eulogy, talking about how much he loved me, how devastated he was. Tears streamed down her face. All lies, every word. Do you remember the funeral? I heard everything. The pastor, the prayers. I felt them start to lower the casket into the grave. Knew the concrete was at the bottom, knew I was going to suffocate, and I couldn't do anything, couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her voice broke completely. I was going to die alone in the dark, and no one would ever know I'd been awake. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Then what happened? I heard someone shouting, saying I wasn't dead, demanding they stop. I didn't understand what was happening. Then I felt something on my tongue, something bitter, and slowly, so slowly, feelings started returning. My fingers twitched, my throat moved. I could breathe, She couldn't continue. Callister gave her a moment. Miss Fairchild, do you believe Richard tried to murder you? I know he did. How? Because when I opened my eyes at the cemetery, the first thing I saw was his face, and there was no surprise. No relief, just rage. Pure rage that I was alive. She turned to the jury. He pulled out a second syringe, tried to finish what he'd started. If those men hadn't stopped him, he would have killed me right there. No further questions. Finch's cross-examination was brief, perfunctory. Even he recognized there was no attacking a woman who'd been buried alive. Ms. Fairchild, you suffered a traumatic experience. Is it possible your perception was compromised, that you misinterpreted what you saw? I know what I saw. Richard tried to murder me. No further questions. Closing arguments came Friday afternoon. Callister reminded the jury of everything: Dr. Keating's confession, the emails, the toxicology evidence, The syringe, Micah's testimony, Samantha's testimony. Ladies and gentlemen, this was calculated murder. Cold, deliberate, evil. Richard Fairchild poisoned his wife and would have buried her alive if not for one man's courage. Don't let expensive lawyers obscure the truth. Finch painted Richard as a grieving husband, Dr. Keating as a liar, Micah as unreliable. Reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. That's all you need, and this case is built on the questionable testimony of a man who lives in a storage room and a doctor trying to save himself. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. At 4:30 p.m., they returned. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman stood a black woman in her 50s, elementary school teacher. We have your honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find guilty? Samantha's hand found Micah's, gripped tight. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. Richard's face drained of all color. Finch put a hand on his shoulder, but Richard shoved it away violently. Judge Brooks's expression remained stern. Mr. Fairchild, you will be sentenced Monday morning. Until then, remanded without bail. Bailiff. As officers approached, Richard lunged to his feet, face contorted with rage. This is bullshit. She deserved to die. I gave her everything and she treated me like nothing. He pointed at Samantha, spittle flying. You think you won? You'll die alone, Catherine, just like you would have died in that coffin if this janitor hadn't. 3 bailiffs wrestled him toward the door. Richard's screams echoed. I should have finished you. Should have. The door slammed, cutting him off. The courtroom sat in shocked silence. Judge Brooks's gavel cracked. This court is adjourned. Samantha was shaking. Micah pulled her against his shoulder, not caring about cameras or propriety. He can't hurt you anymore. It's over. Outside the courthouse steps swarmed with media. Callister addressed them briefly. Justice has been served. Richard Fairchild will spend the rest of his life in prison. Samantha stopped on the steps, turned to the cameras. I want to say something about the man who saved my life. She pulled Micah forward despite his protests. Micah Dalton is a veteran, a hero. He risked everything to save a stranger. Society judged him by his circumstances, but he showed more courage and integrity than people with wealth and status. She paused, composed herself. I'm announcing the Dalton Foundation. $50 million to help veterans provide housing for the Homeless Fund, medical care for those who can't afford it. The crowd erupted with questions. And I'm offering Mr. Dalton a position at Vantage Tech Industries, not as a janitor, as my special advisor. Micah's jaw dropped. Samantha, I can't. You can, she said quietly for his ears only. You saved my life. Let me help rebuild yours. Monday morning arrived with the weight of finality. Philadelphia County Courthouse filled once more, but the atmosphere had shifted. The verdict was in. Now came punishment. Judge Helena Brooks took the bench at precisely 9 a.m. Her expression held no sympathy, no mercy, only the cold calculus of justice. Richard Fairchild stood in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, the expensive suits in polished appearance stripped away. He looked smaller now, diminished. The empire he'd tried to steal had slipped through his fingers like water. Mr. Fairchild, Judge Brooks began, voice carrying absolute authority. You have been found guilty on all counts. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say? Richard's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Richard shook his head, stood. Yes, I have something to say. The courtroom leaned forward. Richard's face twisted with bitterness. I loved her, Samantha. I gave her everything, my time, my loyalty, my devotion, and she gave me nothing. Treated me like an employee, like I was beneath her. His voice rose. I built that company as much as she did. You deserved nothing. Judge Brooks cut him off. You deserved what you earned through honest work. Instead, you chose murder. You poisoned your wife, planned to bury her alive, and showed no remorse even when caught. She looked down at her notes. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind bars contemplating the evil you attempted. Richard's face went from red to white. No, this isn't. Remove the defendant. As bailiffs dragged him away, Richard screamed, It was all supposed to be mine. Everything she doesn't deserve. The door slammed, cutting off his words. Judge Brooks turned to Dr. Mason Keating, who sat hunched in his chair looking 20 years older than his actual age. Dr. Keating, you betrayed your oath. Betrayed a patient who trusted you. However, your cooperation and genuine remorse are factors this court considers. She paused. You are sentenced to 12 years in prison, eligible for parole in 6 years, contingent on continued cooperation and good behavior. Dr. Keating nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the woman you tried to help murder. Dr. Keating turned at Samantha, his face crumbling. I'm sorry, Samantha. What I did was unforgivable. I hope someday... I hope your daughter makes it into Yale, Samantha said quietly, and I hope she never learns what her father was willing to do out of cowardice. The words landed like physical blows. Dr. Keating collapsed, completely guided away by guards. Outside the courthouse, Samantha addressed the media one final time. Justice has been served. Richard Fairchild will never hurt anyone again. And I want to use this moment to talk about second chances. She pulled Micah forward. He'd borrowed another suit, still slightly too big, still obviously thrift store, but he stood straighter now, less like someone apologizing for existing. Micah Dalton lost everything, his career, his family, his sense of purpose. Society saw him as disposable. A man living in a storage room wasn't worth listening to when he tried to report a crime. Her voice strengthened. But he didn't give up. He acted with courage when it would have been easier to stay silent. And he saved my life. She turned to him. The Dalton Foundation will help veterans transition to civilian life, fund housing, and provide medical care. And Micah will help guide it, because nobody understands second chances better than someone who thought they'd lost their last one. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Micah stood frozen, overwhelmed, until Samantha squeezed his hand. You deserve this, she whispered. All of it. The weeks that followed moved with surreal speed. Samantha invited Micah to stay at her estate, a massive property in the Philadelphia suburbs, with guest houses and gardens that stretched for acres. He'd refused at first, uncomfortable with charity. It's not charity, Samantha had said firmly. It's gratitude and strategy. The foundation needs you involved. That means meetings, planning sessions, late nights, working through details. It's easier if you're here. So Micah moved from the cemetery storage room to a guest house larger than any place he'd lived in 7 years. It had a bedroom, a bathroom with hot water that didn't run out, a kitchen, windows. He spent the first night sitting on the bed, unable to process the change. Samantha found him there the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the sunrise through clean windows. Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking this was a dream, that I'd wake up back in the storage room. She sat beside him. It's not a dream. This is real. You're allowed to have a life again, Micah. I don't know how. Then we'll figure it out together. The Dalton Foundation launched officially in November. Initial funding $50 million. Mission, helping veterans transition to civilian life, providing housing assistance, funding medical care for those without insurance. Micah threw himself into the work with intensity that surprised even Samantha. He interviewed veterans, listened to their stories, understood their struggles intimately because he'd lived them. He identified gaps in existing programs, found ways to connect people with resources, used his software engineering background to build databases tracking success rates and outcomes. Within 2 months, the foundation had helped 80 veterans find stable housing, placed 42 in jobs, funded medical care for 70 families. Samantha watched him transform. The defeated man who'd swept cemetery parking lots was disappearing, replaced by someone with purpose and direction. But she also noticed something else. The way Micah's eyes followed her when she entered a room. The way his voice softened when he spoke to her. The careful distance he maintained, as if afraid to presume too much. And if she was honest with herself, she felt it too. Admiration had become something deeper. Gratitude had shifted into genuine affection. She found herself looking forward to their evening strategy sessions, not for the work, but for the company. Micah made her laugh, asked questions that challenged her thinking, treated her like a person, not a billionaire CEO. For the first time since the funeral, Samantha felt truly alive. But she also knew she couldn't act on these feelings. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Micah was still healing, still rebuilding. The last thing he needed was complicated romantic entanglement with the woman whose life he'd saved. So she kept her distance. Professional, friendly, nothing more. The shift came in February, 4 months after the trial. Mike had been working at the Foundation's offices, a converted warehouse in downtown Philadelphia, when he met Elena Hayes. 42 years old, warm smile, dark hair touched with gray. She taught high school English, volunteered with veteran support groups, and had that particular kindness that came from genuine empathy rather than pity. She'd come to inquire about the Foundation's literacy programs for veterans. Many struggled with reading due to untreated dyslexia or educational gaps. Elena wanted to help. Micah gave her the tour, explained the programs, and found himself relaxed in a way he rarely felt around new people. Elena didn't know about the funeral, didn't recognize his name. To her, he was just another person trying to make a difference. They started having coffee after her tutoring sessions, casual conversations that stretched into hours. She told him about her late husband killed in a car accident 5 years ago, about learning to live alone, about finding purpose in teaching. Micah told her about Emma and Lily, the betrayal, the years of homelessness, the slow climb back to functionality. Elena listened without judgment, without the careful tiptoeing most people employed when they learned his history. "You're not broken," she said one evening over coffee. "You're healing. There's a difference." Something in Micah's chest loosened. "I feel like I've been broken so long, I don't remember what whole feels like." Maybe you're not supposed to go back to what you were. Maybe healing means becoming someone new. Their friendship deepened naturally. Coffee became dinners. Dinners became walks through the city. Walks became comfortable silences where words weren't necessary. One Saturday afternoon, while working together at the Foundation, Micah turned to Samantha with unusual excitement in his voice. "Samantha, there's someone I want you to meet." Her heart dropped, though she kept her expression neutral. "Oh, Elena Hayes. She's been volunteering with our literacy program. She makes me smile again, really smile." For the first time in years, Samantha forced brightness into her voice. "That's wonderful, Micah. I'd love to meet her." That night alone in her study, Samantha allowed herself to cry. She'd known this was coming, had seen the way Micah's face lit up when Elena called, the way he laughed more easily, the way he seemed lighter, less burdened. She'd hoped foolishly, selfishly, that maybe someday Micah might see her as more than the woman he'd saved. That gratitude might transform into something deeper. But reality was reality. Elena was age-appropriate, kind, unconnected to trauma. She represented a fresh start, unburdened by the weight of attempted murder and resurrection. Samantha could offer wealth, opportunity, gratitude. Elena offered genuine human connection. There was no competition. Samantha wiped her tears, lifted her chin, and made a decision. If Micah couldn't be hers romantically, she would support his happiness in whatever form it took. Even if it meant watching him fall in love with someone else. Even if it broke her heart. 6 months after the trial, Micah proposed to Elena. They'd been walking through Fairmount Park on a Sunday afternoon, watching families picnic and children play, when Micah stopped beneath an oak tree. "Elena, I need to tell you something." She turned, saw the nervousness in his face. What's wrong, bud?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right for the first time in years." He took her hands. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. The belief that I could be loved again. That I deserved to be loved." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not rich. I don't have much to offer except a heart that's been broken but is learning to be whole again. But if you'll have me." He pulled out a simple ring, silver band, small diamond, nothing extravagant, everything sincere. "Will you marry me?" Elena laughed and cried simultaneously. "Yes, God, yes." They kissed beneath the oak tree while joggers passed and birds sang, and the world continued spinning, indifferent to individual joy, but somehow brighter because of it. Micah told Samantha that evening, eyes shining with happiness. She said yes, we're getting married. Samantha hugged him, felt his arms around her, and allowed herself one moment of pure grief for what could never be. Then she pulled back, smiled with perfect sincerity, and said, "I'm so happy for you, Micah. Elena is lucky. You both are." We'd like you at the wedding. You're part of this story, part of my healing. I'd be honored. That night, Samantha sat in her empty penthouse. She still hadn't moved back to the estate permanently and faced the loneliness she'd been avoiding. The trial had ended. Justice had been served. The foundation was thriving, but she was still alone. Micah had found love, purpose, a future. Samantha had her company, her wealth, her mission, but no one to share it with. She'd built walls so high for so long that she'd forgotten how to let people in. And now the one person who'd seen past those walls was marrying someone else. The irony was almost funny. Almost. The change came at a charity gala 3 months later. Samantha attended reluctantly dressed in a designer gown. She didn't care about preparing to make small talk with people who wanted her money more than her company. She was considering leaving early when Jonathan Reeves approached. 48 years old CEO of Green Tech Solutions with the kind of understated confidence that came from genuine achievement rather than inherited wealth. He was a widower. His wife had died of cancer 2 years prior and had that particular understanding in his eyes that came from surviving grief. Ms. Fairchild, I've been wanting to meet you. Please call me Samantha. And why's that? Because anyone who can come back from being buried alive and immediately start a foundation to help others is someone worth knowing. Samantha blinked, surprised by the directness. You know about that? Everyone knows about that. The funeral that stopped, the heroic groundskeeper, the evil husband. Jonathan's smile was gentle. But what interests me is what you did after. Most people would hide. You started helping others. They talked for 2 hours. About business, yes, but also about loss. About the particular loneliness of success. About building empires but forgetting to build lives. Jonathan didn't see a billionaire. He saw a woman who'd survived trauma and chosen purpose over bitterness. Would you have dinner with me? He asked as the gala wound down. Not business, just conversation. Samantha considered. Every instinct told her to refuse. She didn't date, didn't let people in, didn't risk vulnerability. But those instincts had left her alone in a penthouse, watching the man she loved marry someone else. I'd like that, she heard herself say. Dinner became dinners. Conversations stretched into late nights. Jonathan made her laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time since the trial. He didn't try to fix her, didn't treat her trauma as something to be overcome through willpower. Simply accepted that she'd been through hell and come out the other side changed. I still can't sleep in enclosed spaces, she admitted one evening. I sleep with all the lights on, windows open, the thought of being trapped. Then we'll never close the windows, Jonathan said simply. Trauma doesn't need to be conquered, just accommodated. Samantha felt something shift in her chest. This man understood. Not because he'd been buried alive, but because he'd lost his wife to cancer, had watched her waste away over 18 months, understood what it meant to be powerless in the face of death. They were both survivors, both learning to live again. 3 months later, Jonathan proposed at the Foundation's 1-year anniversary gala. Simple, no grand gesture, just a quiet question whispered after his speech praising Samantha's work. I know it's fast. I know we're both still healing, but I also know life's too short to waste on fear. Marry me. Samantha looked across the gala and saw Micah and Elena, happily married now, glowing with newlywed joy. They'd found their second chance. Maybe she deserved hers too. Yes, Micah and Elena's wedding came first in early spring. Small ceremony in a garden venue, 75 guests, simple decorations. Elena wore a flowing white dress. Micah wore a navy suit purchased new, not borrowed, and looked more at peace than Samantha had ever seen him. She sat in the front row genuinely happy, despite the ache in her chest. When Micah read his vows, his voice was steady. Elena, you taught me that broken things can be made whole, that a life destroyed can be rebuilt. You gave me hope when I'd forgotten what hope felt like. I promised to love you, honor you, and wake up every day grateful you chose me. Elena's vows were equally moving. Micah, you are the strongest person I know. Not because you survived loss, but because you chose to keep living, keep helping, keep hoping. I promise to stand beside you, support your healing, and build a life together that honors what we've both overcome. The kiss was gentle, reverent, full of quiet joy. At the reception, Samantha approached them with a wrapped gift. "For your new beginning," she said. Inside was a photo frame containing one of Lily's old drawings, the one Micah had kept of a family holding hands. Below it, a new drawing, Elena, Micah, and their future children. Micah's eyes filled with tears. "How did you—" "I had an artist recreate it, to remind you that families can be rebuilt. That loss doesn't have to be the end of love." He hugged her tightly. "Thank you for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." "Wrong," Samantha whispered. "I wouldn't be here without you." Samantha and Jonathan's wedding came 6 months later. Larger 200 guests, but still intimate by Billionaire standards. Held at the estate gardens, blooming with late summer flowers, string quartet playing classical music. Samantha wore ivory silk, her mother's pearls, and a smile that reached her eyes. Jonathan wore a classic tuxedo and looked at his bride like she was the only person in existence. Micah and Elena sat in the front row, glowing with early pregnancy, their first child due in February. When Samantha read her vows, she thought about the coffin, the darkness, the certainty of death, and the unexpected resurrection that had led to this moment. "Jonathan, I spent years building walls, protecting myself from vulnerability. Then I was buried alive, and a stranger risked everything to save me. That experience taught me something crucial. Life is too precious to waste on fear." Her voice strengthened. "You see past my wealth, my trauma, my carefully constructed defenses. You see me, and you love me anyway. I promise to let you in, to trust you, to build a life together that honors second chances." Jonathan's vows were simpler. "Samantha, you are the strongest woman I've ever met. Not because you survived attempted murder, but because you chose to help others instead of becoming bitter. I promise to stand beside you, support your mission, and remind you every day that you're not alone anymore." The kiss was witnessed by 200 people, but felt private, sacred. A promise made in the shadow of death and kept in the light of life. 1 year later, both families gathered at Oakmont Cemetery. Not for a funeral, for a dedication. Samantha had purchased Section E, Row 12, the gravesite where she'd almost been buried. She'd had it transformed into a memorial garden, dedicated to second chances. A marble monument stood at the center, engraved with words that summarized everything from ashes to dawn, in memory of lives saved, lessons learned, and the truth that hope can rise from the darkest places. Micah stood with Elena, their son Daniel, 6 months old, sleeping peacefully in Elena's arms. Samantha stood with Jonathan, her hand on her own pregnant belly, their daughter due in 3 months. Aunt Helen was there, Detective Carter, even Dr. Keating's daughter Jessica, who'd gotten into Yale on full scholarship and written Samantha a letter of gratitude for not blaming her for her father's crimes. As the crowd gathered, Samantha stepped to the monument and spoke. "This place almost became my grave. Instead, it became the site of my resurrection. One man's courage saved my life. But more than that, it taught me something crucial." She looked at Micah. "We're all capable of heroism, all capable of rising from our own ashes, all worthy of second chances, no matter how far we've fallen." Micah stepped forward, Daniel asleep in his arms. "7 years ago, I lost everything. Lost myself. I spent years convinced I was disposable, worthless, a burden to be ignored." His voice strengthened. "Then I had the chance to save someone. And in saving Samantha, I saved myself, found purpose again, found love again, found hope." He turned to the gathered crowd. "If you're struggling, if you've lost everything, if you think you're beyond redemption, you're not. You're not disposable. You're not worthless. You're human. And humans can rise from any depth if they choose to keep fighting." Samantha added, "The Dalton Foundation has now helped 1,200 veterans, provided housing for 800 families, funded medical care for 3,000 people. All because one man decided that saving a stranger was worth risking everything." She unveiled a second plaque, the Micah Dalton Memorial Garden. "Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear cemetery work uniforms and carry antidotes they hope they'll never need to use." Micah laughed through tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep fighting," Samantha said. "For yourself, for your family, for everyone who needs someone to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves." As the ceremony concluded, both families walked through the memorial garden together. Children would be born here, metaphorically speaking. Lives would be celebrated. The place of almost death had become a symbol of hope. The Dalton Foundation's annual gala had become one of Philadelphia's most prestigious events. Not because of wealth, though money flowed freely, but because of impact. 5,000 veterans helped, 2,000 families housed, 15,000 medical procedures funded. Micah stood at the podium, now 52, graying at the temples but healthier than he'd been in decades. Beside him, Elena glowed with the quiet pride of someone who'd helped rebuild a broken man. Their children sat in the front row. Daniel, 5 years old, Sophia, 3, both already showing their father's compassion and their mother's wisdom. Samantha sat nearby with Jonathan and their 2 daughters, Emma, 4, and Grace, 2, named intentionally. Emma to honor the wife who'd left, Grace to honor the mercy that had saved Samantha's life. Micah's speech was brief. 10 years ago, I was sleeping in a cemetery storage room, convinced my life was over. Today, I stand here as executive director of a foundation that's changed thousands of lives. Not because I'm special, because someone gave me a second chance. He looked at Samantha. She was supposed to die. I was supposed to stay invisible. Instead, we both found new lives, new families, new purpose. Samantha took the podium. Micah saved my life twice, once at a funeral, once by showing me that success without human connection is just expensive loneliness. He taught me to trust, to love, to risk vulnerability. She gestured to the crowd, veterans, families, donors, all connected by the common thread of second chances. We all have a choice when life destroys us. Become bitter or become better. Micah chose better, and in doing so showed thousands of others that they could too. The applause was thunderous. Later, after the formal program ended, Samantha and Micah stood alone in the memorial garden at Oakmont Cemetery. Their spouses had taken the children home, leaving the 2 of them with the ghosts of who they'd been. "Do you ever think about how close it came?" Samantha asked quietly. "If you'd been working a different shift, if you hadn't overheard, if you hadn't been brave enough to act?" "Every day," Micah admitted. "But I also think about everything that came after. Elena, Daniel, Sophia, the foundation, helping people. None of that happens if I stay silent." "We saved each other," Samantha said. "You pulled me from a grave. I pulled you from despair. Fair trade." Micah smiled. "More than fair." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Philadelphia. 2 people who'd touched death and chosen life, who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves into something stronger. The memorial plaque gleamed in fading light, from ashes to dawn, not just a motto, a promise, a testament to the truth that hope can rise from any darkness, that love, platonic or romantic, can heal wounds that seem fatal, that second chances aren't given. They're seized by people brave enough to believe they deserve them. Samantha and Micah had both seized theirs, and in doing so created a legacy that would outlive them both.